Welcome to a special edition of Border Life. 100 years ago today, Britain declared war on Germany and joined World War I. In this programme, we join children from Peebles in search of their fallen ancestors.
It's a strange feeling coming and knowing that I have a relative here in the middle of a small town in France.
We hear the stirring story of the piper from the borders who became a hero of the Great War. And I go in search of our region's links with the man who masterminded its victory. And George, right at the top of the house here, Earl Haig's study. The killing fields of Northern Europe claimed 16 million lives during World War I. Per head of population, Scotland lost a higher percentage of men than any other Allied country. But a century on, how relevant is what happened back then to young people today? Tim Baxhall travelled to the battlefields of France and Belgium with pupils from Peebles High School.
Those of you with relatives here, they are on those memorial walls because they have no known grave. Casualties were incredibly high at Lewes.
Finding out about their own connection to the First World War, this battlefield tour by Peebles High School wasn't just a history lesson. For some, it was the story of their own families and the price they paid.
This is your relative, this is your great-great-grandfather.
And he joined up aged 45 to try and find his son, my great-great-uncle, who was 15, and he came back, but my great-great-grandfather never did.
Did they ever actually connect? Did he find him?
No, I don't think so.
He was killed on the 11th of May 1916.
So what's it like to come here and see that name?
It's quite sad. Because you can just only imagine how tragic it must have been for his family when he went in search of his son and he never found him and he ended up and killed himself.
And how my great-great-uncle must have felt, not, having gone out there and not come home with a father who'd gone out looking for him.
At the same memorial, Dud Corner in northern France, there is another link to a Peebles student and a lost relative.
It's that one.
This is Ernest Franklin, isn't it?
Yeah. It's really weird that I'm here, and it's quite emotional. It feels weird. When you see a picture next to him, his name as well. It's a shame that his body's not found.
He kept a diary of his war experience, which was read at the memorial.
This is the 3rd of September. We went up to the firing line to carry ammunition. We were covered with mud from head to foot. We arrived at Bouvry at 6 a.m. We went out again for digging on the 5th and 6th, carrying more ammunition. And he was killed on the 26th. So he wasn't in the country a month before he was killed at just 19.
The previous day on the Somme, Alex had had the chance to meet a French relative whose Scottish grandfather had stayed on in France after fighting in the war.
My great-great-great-uncle is called Ernest Franklin. He had 2 brothers, and one of his brothers married a French girl when he was here and survived the First World War.
He came in France and he married with my grandmother, and he stayed in France a long time.
During a 3-day visit, the pupils saw some of the most important locations of World War I, from the trenches of Vimy Ridge to the largest French war cemetery at Notre Dame de Lorette, and the huge memorial to the missing of the Battle of the Somme. The scale of the losses is hard to imagine. This memorial commemorates 72,000 men, and those are just the missing whose bodies were never identified.
So that's the memorial there. So these are the panels along here.
Okay.
All right, so we'll have to find this one.
I've just been looking at my great-granddad, I think. I hope it's my great-granddad, yeah. You learn about these things in school and you really get the perspective of it when you come here. So I think it's one of the best things I've ever done, yeah.
Despite the thousands still missing, some students did manage to see the graves of their descendants.
That is your relation, but you are typical of the First World War in Scotland.
I knew that he died before my great-grandma got to meet him because she was born during the war. It's a strange feeling coming and knowing that I have a relative here in the middle of a small town in France, and he was buried here.
At the Belgian city of Ypres, the last post is sounded every night at the Menning Gate to commemorate those lost in some of the costliest fighting of the entire war.
At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
All around the city there are reminders of what happened, including most graphically at Tyne Cot, the largest Commonwealth war cemetery in the world.
So killed on Thursday the 4th of October 1917, aged 25.
It's such a strange feeling, like just seeing his name on the wall and knowing I have some connection to someone who fought for our country and died for our country. It's an unexplainable feeling. He could be underneath any of the unknown graves in any cemetery we visited, and we have no clue where he is. He could still be on the battlefield, and all we have is his name on the wall.
There we go.
A few miles away there is another connection to the huge losses suffered by Scottish troops.
Thomas Cairns was my great-great-uncle, and he lived in Denham, which is near Haig, as a boy. And he originally trained as a gamekeeper at Bow Hill House and estate, and then he joined the Glasgow Police Service and then enlisted in the war. And then he fought during the Somme and at Ypres, and that was when he was eventually killed.
For all the pupils, this was a very personal look at history and a reminder of the long shadow that World War I can still cast today.
I think I'll take away the realisation that we are really lucky today, and that we don't have to go out and fight wars, and we really have a very peaceful life compared to some of the people 100 years ago.
Our next report recounts the remarkable story of the Berwickshire man who won the highest honour for bravery in World War I by playing his bagpipes. Jill Brown has more.
On a beautiful June day, men of the King's Own Scottish Borderers Association gathered to pay their respects to one of their own, buried here in Norham. Piper Daniel Laidlaw from Swinton near Duns won the Victoria Cross for an act of extraordinary bravery.
For most conspicuous bravery prior to an assault on German trenches near Luz, during the worst of the bombardment, Piper Laidlaw, seeing that his company was badly shaken from the effects of gas, with absolute coolness and disregard of danger, he jumped up on the parapet of the trench in front of the full face of the enemy's fire and played the regimental march and the regimental charge, which everyone just looked at him, and that motivated them to get out of the trench and get going. Because of that sort of motivational act of leadership, the position was won against the Germans. It was set to go the other way had he not done what he did.
Be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his power, so that you may be able to withstand on that evil day.
These World War I battles were pretty extraordinary in terms of rates of slaughter. Those are fairly well known, but this was just another example of what these guys did. The 6th Battalion, which was to the right of the 7th Battalion, which Piper Laidlaw was in, a similar thing happened where Pipe Major Mackenzie jumped up onto the parapet and tried to do the same sort of thing, but he was shot and killed immediately. And the entire battalion of about 650 men were annihilated in 4.5 minutes. So every single man of that battalion was either shot or blown up or drowned by the waves of men going over the top of them.
Let us remember before God and commend to his safekeeping those who have died for their country in war.
Despite being injured at Loos, Piper Laidlaw was still in demand. This extraordinary footage is a reconstruction of the battle, and the part of the heroic Piper is played by Daniel Laidlaw himself.
Piper Laidlaw mounted the parapet and won his Victoria Cross, piping his comrades forward.
I at once got the pipes going and the laddies gave a cheer. I kept on piping and hobbling after the laddies until I could go no further.
The bagpipes have an important role in Scottish military tradition.
Marching on to parade and hearing the pipes is something that's you can't beat that. Oh, play the pipes and that's the jocks. That's the jocks gone over the next hill. You know, it makes people get up and do courageous things. It stirs the soul.
The bond of the King's Own Scottish Borderers Regiment is strong.
The old motto, once a borderer, always a borderer, it plays out today. You see these guys. Ken Fraser was here, he joined the army in 1945. As you can tell by his row of medals, he's sort of fought in every campaign sort of since then. And then Cush Common from Coldstream won the military medal in Korea. And it was amazing to see that cadet laying the wreath there. That's a direct descendant of Piper Laidlaw.
He returned to the borders to live out a long life to the age of 74, working as a postmaster at Shaw's Dean.
One of our boys lying here, and he's a Victoria Cross winner, you know, surely we can go and put a wreath on his grave once a year and pay our respects. That's what we're doing.
After the break, I visit the borders home of the controversial commander who led British forces to victory in the Great War. Welcome back to our Border Life World War I Centenary special. We are commemorating our links with the fighting, and I'm heading to Newtown St Boswells, to the home of the man who led British forces to victory in 1918. This is Bemersyde House, bought by public subscription for the Army's Commander-in-Chief, Field Marshal Haig.
His family originally came from here, and he was a direct descendant of who should have been the 17th Laird. So in a sense, when the nation clubbed together and bought Bemersyde for Haig, it was returning it to someone who would have been rightfully in the line of descent anyway.
Douglas Haig was born in Edinburgh, but Haig's a reaving name and Bemersyde's a former peel tower. I'm getting a guided tour of this historic house from military historian George Webster.
The figure that they were given to buy the house from a member of the Haig family, a distant cousin of Haig's, was just over £53,000.
Which was an awful lot of money.
It was a huge amount of money in 1919 when the subscription started.
Donations came from all over the empire. Even Indian Maharajas were written to. The property was bought, but Haig still had to find the money to make it habitable.
There was huge renovations to be done structurally. The house was in a very bad repair. It cost Haig something over £40,000 to put the house in a livable condition after he was presented with it. Oh, he truly loved being here at Bemersyde. It meant everything to him. This was his refuge after the war and a place where he could spend time finally with his young family. And let's not forget, his two youngest children were only born in the last 2 years of the war.
Victory made Earl Haig a hugely popular figure after the war, but in later years his image became a controversial one, with lines like Butcher of the Somme and Lions led by donkeys. George Webster is on a mission to restore Earl Haig's reputation. He's a trustee and historian at the Douglas Haig Fellowship, an educational charity set up to detail the Field Marshal's life and work.
Titles like Butcher Haig did not come into vogue until the late 50s, 1960s. These are not contemporary usages. I know of no source that can identify Haig being referred to as Butcher Haig during his lifetime. You will find very few academics working on the First World War now who would subscribe to the Lions led by donkeys school of thought. Britain went to war as a political decision. How it was fought was down to the generals, but if the politicians had thought at any point that the price was not worth paying, they could have sued for peace at any time. And in fact, at the end of the Battle of the Somme, the Germans put out peace feelers for a negotiated peace, and these were rejected by the British and French.
After the war, Earl Haig had another battle on his hands, assisting the tens of thousands of wounded and disabled soldiers. He helped set up the Royal British Legion and the Poppy Appeal. He also corresponded with hundreds of veterans. It was yet another uphill struggle. And George, right at the top of the house here, Earl Haig's study, where the great man would have sat and penned all those letters.
Well, he got a huge mail, and he would sit in this study here and respond to people, many of whom had lost sons or husbands in the war. He was advised that it wasn't doing his health any good to be coping with this deluge of mail by himself and in longhand. But Haig's answer was that he couldn't do much for a lot of these people, and the least he could do was give them a reply written in his own hand.
How dogmatic was he? How campaigning was he on their behalf?
Oh, he went into this select committee in 1919 and he actually embarrassed them by using individual case histories. In one case, a tubercular wounded soldier who had his pension reduced because he was in a sanatorium, and his family were literally starving. And at the end of it, Haig pointed out that the man's young son had recently died, sarcastically adding, well, that will save the government £24 per annum.
What sort of man do you think he was, if you had to sum him up?
He was quite a simple man, actually, at heart, unostentatious. And I think that's one of the things that we'll see when we go down to look at his grave later on.
Unlike other national leaders, Earl Haig is not buried in St Paul's Cathedral, London. This is where he wanted to lie, at Dryburgh Abbey in the Borders, under the same headstone as those men buried in France and Belgium.
It actually means effectively that their commander-in-chief lies under the same simple stone as those of his men who fell in battle during the Great War. There's no reference on his stone to the fact that he was either an earl or a field marshal. His religious outlook as well would have looked upon death as being very much a great leveller.
In 1928, Earl Haig had died aged 66 of a heart attack whilst away on British Legion business. Now he was coming home for the last time.
He lay in state for 3 days in London. When he came up to Edinburgh, he again lay in state in St Giles for 3 days. And again, it was estimated that there was between 30 and 40 people filing past per minute. But as the train went through the winter fields from Edinburgh to St Boswell's, people would stand in the fields and byways, and the men would take their hats off as the train passed.
On his instructions, he was carried to the Abbey on a farm cart pulled by plough horses. That seems bizarre, doesn't it? This great military leader being brought to rest on a farm cart.
Yeah, he was buried pretty much as a traditional Scottish country laird, rather than an earl and a field marshal.
Every year, Earl Haig is remembered at this. The annual Founders' Day at Dryburgh Abbey commemorates the formation in 1921 of the Royal British Legion. This moving ceremony is organised by Legion Scotland, who still look after struggling veterans today.
This is his legacy. The Legion is his legacy. He was absolutely determined that he would not let down the men who had served this country. There was welfare provision for the men who had served, and there was comradeship amongst each other.
Was there in any way a sense of guilt in that he felt he had to set up this charity?
No, I don't believe so at all. I mean, a good officer is always concerned about his men, and even a field marshal would be concerned about the men who had sacrificed so much. He could have just gone home, gone to Bemersyde, put his feet up and said, golly, what a hard job that was, I've done it. But he didn't. He kept going, looking after men.
Back at Bemersyde, a project's underway. In the sunken garden designed by Earl Haig. New borders are planned, but instead of red poppies, these will house the white flowers of peace.
We've got 100 years, so therefore we've got 100 roses. Towards the end of the year, those will be planted, and the surrounding garden will be hopefully in full bloom by this time next year.
Ian Pollitt is a former soldier, a para, and now a state gardener in these spectacular grounds, which are open to the public. When you think about it, Earl Haig, to come home to this after all he'd seen on the battlefields, must have been idyllic, really.
Absolutely perfect. After such a horrendous time, to come back to a place like this where one can relax and reflect must be an absolute joy for him at the time.
And it shows really the healing power of nature, doesn't it?
Very much so. I speak from personal experience. To be in a garden or be in a place like this is sublime, to say the least.
And that's it from this special edition of Border Life. Don't forget to join us again next time.